This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin, your one-stop shop for wearable simulators and everything standardized patient.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simulation Nation. We are going to be talking about how to advocate for simulation in a lot of different ways. And I'm really excited to kind of dive into all the different ways that people can be advocates.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to define what advocacy is in the beginning because, again, health professionals, we understand the idea of being a patient advocate, right? And that we are speaking for someone who can't or won't speak for themselves, or that concept or that idea behind it. But really, advocacy is that same idea, but taking it to a larger level. So the definition that I looked up was any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. So the idea of really supporting what we do within healthcare simulation at a larger level, beyond the typical group of people that you're rubbing shoulders with.
Yeah, and I think that the important piece is that when we think of advocacy, I think that oftentimes it's kind of this big, grand, huge concept that doesn't feel attainable. It doesn't feel like the person who, you know, maybe has a year under their belt doing simulation feels like the appropriate person to move forward with advocacy. Because I think a lot of times we think of it as at the governmental level, right? It's kind of like, oh, well, that's what it is. We've got to be rubbing shoulders with, you know, all these different people. But really, I think everyone can be an advocate, especially looking at it through that lens of definition, is that this is more or less us just branching out from our own sim centers, us branching out in who we're talking to and discussing what it is that we're doing in simulation, why we started in simulation. I think people's personal stories of why this is impactful for them has so many reasons across the board for the reasons why we're involved in it. And I think that it's just that concept that anyone can do it. So don't think that this has to be the simulation giants, the people who have been around for 20 and 30 years, that they're the only ones who can move forward with advocacy. Everyone can. And the more that we look to our neighbor or somebody else to do it, the less people that are going to be there. But the more that we can all kind of stand together to move forward, discuss it, share our vulnerabilities, then you are an advocate. Then you are actually going forward with advocacy for that simulation.
And I think, again, Haru Okuda, who was the SSH president, this was kind of his platform. This is what he chose as the president. And I think that it's because we just don't do a really good job. I remember when I first started the SP program at the university, and we started it we had no money. It was 2008, 2009. But we started it by building first an independent study course and then a 3-credit course. And I just remember for 2.5 years, my head was down and I was working so hard to get SP Sim integrated into the curriculum, to write SP Sims, to get, to do the learning. And then all of a sudden I was like, I have to tell other people about what we're doing. This is really cool. And again, I chose to do that within the simulation community because it was something specific for simulation. But there is still ways to get the word out about what you're doing and to bring awareness to healthcare simulation in other ways or in other facets that really isn't, it's not going to require a huge amount of time or energy. One of the things that I never thought about, again, being a healthcare provider and being an educator, is the media would love the opportunity to come and write a story on this. I don't know, Nate, our producer here, can you talk a little bit about how they have to have filler time or there's time within the media to make, to do like human stories about good things that are happening in this world, I guess is the best way to put it?
Yeah, so basically a lot of the media companies have come to start doing a lot of community involvement because we've strayed from that. So I think that's what you're kind of getting at here. It's the smaller groups focusing on the more niche stuff that's going on within the community instead of widespread, because we're getting that from all the major publications already, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the large media and news groups. So a lot of them are starting to fill in that very small, more intimate kind of content a lot more.
Yeah, and I would say that I think that the content here is relating to healthcare, which is, again, something that's really timely and important, I think, throughout time in history, is, making healthcare better. But it's also something to do with, education, And it is also the idea of it's very visual. So if it is a, newscast and they're bringing in media, then they want to do a video of something that you're doing. So again, not that you would necessarily do it you want to have volunteer students doing a simulation. It doesn't need to be during normal simulation times, but I never knew this, but you can call the marketing department within your institution and have them contact the media for you. I remember when we did at Duquesne, we went and did what was it?
It was a media day. We just were highlighting it and then putting it out during National Healthcare Sim Week.
But one of the things that their marketing team said to the Duquesne nursing simulationists was, we have to come here more often, right? So the idea, a lot of times learning happens in classrooms and it's not all that exciting. It's not that visual, right? And I think that this is something that it really gets to highlight some of the cool things that you're doing, and getting interviews with your students and having them share how that has impacted their clinical learning, or having students come back who are fairly new graduates and talking about how simulation learning has impacted them as they've transitioned into a professional role. All those kinds of things, it's not necessarily knocking on a legislature's door, but it is making a phone call or two to the marketing department and saying, hey, we'd love to invite the news to come in as we unveil our new sim lab, or if we are doing a different simulation. If you think about things that are timely.
It can even be new technology. It doesn't even need to be a new sim center. It can just be that you got a new piece of technology, or you're including a new simulation that has to do with cardiac arrest, or if you do a disaster day or something that is a little bit bigger, all of those things lend themselves very well to wanting to have people come in and be able to share a story on it.
Like diversity, equity, inclusion, super timely, right? So those types of things are the things that they like to share, and it's something that they'll do a few minute segments on, again, locally or regionally, just depending on who you invite. I know for us, we were based in Delaware and we were out of Newark, Delaware, but we had the newspaper come and take pictures, and they did a series spot on it. We've had 6 NBC News come, or I don't know if it's NBC, I shouldn't say, one of the major networks, but it was just for the Philadelphia area. So the more you can think about that, and the more that your marketing team gets excited about it, the more they're going to be sharing that with other people and trying to get people in. It does lead to philanthropic opportunities as well. So it is something to it's not just a benefit from the idea of being an advocate for healthcare simulation and getting the word out, but it is also potentially something where, you can also express what your needs are, and maybe somebody who has a philanthropic brain will, decide that maybe they were an alumni or something and they want to contribute.
Yeah, I think that it isn't even just advocacy, but it's also being able to really help put your sim center on the map and promote your nursing program or your health professions program, whatever it is. Because I think a lot of times, because we do it day in and day out, we forget that what we're doing is so unique and cool. And again, I think it's very common to also compare yourself to others. So, my sim center is not that big, or, I don't have as fancy of a mannequin. I don't have, whatever that may look like. And I think that we just need to remind ourselves as simulationists that what we have is good enough, and that moving forward with what we have, right? And being able to still contact people and bring people in. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't do that at their simulation center with the resources that they have, because everybody can do it. Everyone can bring in the appropriate people. Your marketing team probably already has those contacts. If you don't have a marketing team, reaching out yourself. I remember talking to a dean out in Indiana from a community college, and she was saying, we have to compete with the big guys. We have to compete with all these other big universities that have big names, big programs. I'm basically scratching and clawing to get recognition for what we're doing. And for her big thing was wanting to have Avkin equipment and being able to talk about the fact that they were doing really innovative things inside of simulation. And for her, that was her big movement, was working towards standardized patient program and including hybrid simulation. But for her, I recommended contacting local media, bringing in additional people to be able to show it, because you can talk about it and it's great for tours, but now having media that's also there shooting video and content, you now can add that to your website, start creating blogs. all of these other pieces that now you can start putting out and creating kind of that digital footprint about what you're doing inside of your sim lab, huge. And it's very easy. I will say that with news, it is always hit or miss if they're coming or not. If there is a bigger story that happens that day, they are not coming to you. That is just the bottom line.
Yeah.
But tag teaming in along with something else that you're doing. So if you have a donor event or you're already planning on doing an open house and you invite them in, great, beneficial to have them there, love it, but don't necessarily stand around waiting because it's not always a guarantee that they're coming. It's kind of it's a hit or miss. So I would just say work with them, know what you have. If you can have an advocate, great, that helps you kind of coordinate those relationships, but you don't need them. You know, you really can see what comes forward.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I think from my perspective as far as advocacy, I was literally shocked. I had a good friend who was on the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. She was on their regulatory committee. Mm-hmm. And she had been a chief nursing officer at a major health institution and had built a sim center at her institution. And she and I collaborated on many occasions on different projects, but she had no idea, and I've said this before, but that there was credentialing within healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so I think...
simulation.
Within healthcare simulation, right. So I think she had no idea that there was personal accreditation or institutional accreditation. I think it's really important that
I'm going to get you a shirt made that just says there is credentialing in healthcare simulation.
But it's not like I can wear the shirt, but I can only wear it so far. But if all of us simulationists had a shirt,
everybody wears the shirt.
Everybody wears a shirt. But the concept behind it is we shouldn't just be publishing in journals that are simulation specific. Mm-hmm. So Clinical Simulation in Nursing and the Society for Simulation in Healthcare's journals. Look outside mm-hmm. of those. That's the comfortable spot. And for those of us who have published, if you haven't published, I get it. Like first one, feel free to do it within a simulation journal. But think about if you are, if you are finding some research, mm-hmm. think about having people that are not necessarily simulationists look for that. Read that journal and find that article about what you have identified within healthcare simulation. There's so many meta-analyses that are being done now, like publishing in one of those in a nursing, like not nursing simulation specific, but nursing journal or, a specialty area that if we are simulationists, we are going to search all of them for things related to simulation. But those people that are not within simulation are not necessarily going to search for what's mm-hmm. happening in simulation. So if you can publish in, Nurses for Professional Development or some other journal, if it makes sense to publish your article, I suggest that we put those we put word out that way. Mm-hmm. That's advocating, and it's not necessarily something where you're having to beat down doors. You're just thinking about outside of the box for where you might publish. Mm-hmm. Being on committees that are outside of the norm. So mm-hmm. a lot of us are on NAXL or SSH committees. Think about joining a committee that is your discipline. Think about joining the board of nursing or whatever the committee that you can get on, or even a committee within the community to speak about what healthcare simulation is doing and to be an advocate for healthcare simulation and what we're doing. I think, again, you put your head down and you're working hard and you need to be on a committee, for professional growth within your institution. They typically want you to be involved in some way. Healthcare simulation is the natural course mm-hmm. to make those decisions. But if you are looking for ways to advocate, think about joining another committee to be a voice, out there in the community and within the professions that healthcare simulation touches. I think those are simple ways to be an advocate. Contacting your congressman. I know that Lance Bailey at Healthcare Simulation has done a ton of work with, I want to make sure I get this right, so I'm going to read it because I think it's really important that we're thinking about it. But it's the National Patient Safety and Policy Advocacy Coalition. So the concept behind this is that they are looking for a coalition of people at a federal level, the people that are advocates for patient safety. And they have really embraced the idea of healthcare simulation being a major cog of mm-hmm. that patient safety concept. And Lance is, again, he's worked tirelessly on this and spent a lot of his time in Healthy Sim. So he is your contact if you guys are interested in being on this coalition. But it's what they're in the process now is trying to get legislation enacted that this coalition would be put in place. But it's really kind of, it's funded at a federal level, but it is not the people that are within this coalition are not elected members or anything like that, but it is really to advocate on all aspects of patient safety. So whether it's, hospital safety, or whether it's, thinking about telehealth and how we can make sure patients are safe with that. But again, this coalition has acknowledged the benefit and value of healthcare simulation. So the more voices that are on there to help them as they're setting this up, and as, again, I don't know all of the things that go into it, but I've been on a few meetings, and they're just working hard to get it recognized and to get the legislature to put through whatever policies they need in order to make this work. And I would be wrong to say that I know where we are in that status because I haven't been able to join the last few meetings, but Lance is definitely a great contact, and I'm sure that he has tons of information on his healthysim.com website. So that is something more at a federal level that you could do. It's typically monthly or every other month meetings at this point, but things may be ramping up, and there may be subcommittees that are being formed within that once things get really rolling and get funded. But ultimately, at the end of the day, in healthcare simulation, that's why we all do what we do, is to make patients safer, and healthcare delivery better. So, why not get to the root of this and think about advocating for healthcare simulation in that way? But at the end of the day, when you think about healthcare simulation and the advocacy that is involved with it, doesn't require that you go down to Washington, D.C. and knock on everybody's door.
You do not have to be an expert in law and policy change and international relations, which I think is the concept is that it's like, oh, well, I don't know enough about that. I can't move that forward. And that's the point, is that there's so many ways to be able to advocate where you're just sharing your personal experience, and there's not going to be a pop quiz at the end of it where you actually have to understand how all of this works in detail.
No, and I think that that's really for the people that latch on to your story, right? And the story of your learners, or, some amazing case examples of where healthcare simulation has really made an impact in patient safety and the lives of the learners. So again, from my perspective, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. And one very wise mentor talked to me about your sphere of influence, that whenever you become comfortable where you are and what you're doing, you have to, in order to grow, you have to think about what's the next step. So you don't have to go from, a small sphere of influence to a very large sphere of influence. You could take just the next step and think about that. The idea of publishing an article was very, very scary for me. I will have to say that clinical simulation nursing editor was extremely gracious and provided a lot of valuable feedback for me to make the revisions that I needed. But quite honestly, those journals are looking for articles to publish. They want to be, they have to put out a
the same way the
journal.
Media is looking for videos and stories to talk about.
So, you can send a letter of interest. That's something that I practiced doing when I was getting my master's degree, to see if there's an interest in this before you get started. Make sure you're looking at the author information and thinking about that piece of it, because you don't want to spend time writing an article and then finding out that, it doesn't fit into anything in that particular journal. So my recommendation is don't be afraid to get started. I do have a recommendation for a book for people that have a very loud inner critic. There are people that have that inner critic that just moves and, sometimes can paralyze you to the next step, is the book called Playing Big by Tara Mohr. It's Taramohr. I think it's an amazing book, and I highly recommend everybody to read it that is thinking about trying to, do something special or make a difference. And again, this podcast is really dedicated to encourage you to think about advocating for healthcare simulation. I think there's pockets of us that do advocate, but it's not a unified body having a single voice. And
well, I do know that right now, Society for Simulation in Healthcare, they are also planning on a big advocacy launch where they are having many subcommittees and having people from the industry as well as simulationists involved in that. And I know that there's a huge push forward. I haven't heard any additional information in the last few months, but I do know that there is a current push for that going forward.
Yeah, so that must be from Haru's work that he did. But again, there look within your simulation associations, but also think about the idea of not necessarily just sticking within the healthcare simulation associations, but looking outside of those for ways that you could get involved and be a voice.
Yeah. And then my last takeaway is just, again, contact your students. I think that they are some of the best voices in terms of what they gain out of simulation. I think a lot of us have our own stories as to why we entered into simulation with, different experiences with patients, but utilizing students' voices, I think, are also extremely beneficial, whether they be TAs or students that you just have a closer relationship with. Documenting those stories is huge, because down the line, I think that as we go forward, the more, I call them testimonials, but that comes from more of a business side, but those stories of being able to discuss what they gain from simulation or what their main takeaways are, those are, so valuable when wanting to go forward to show all of the benefits of why we do what we do. And I think we don't do a good enough job. I think a lot of times we store those stories in the back of our heads and we remember them, but being able to push those forwards either to be published on or do further research on, or even just interview style, again, I think that that's a huge benefit as you're kind of documenting next steps.
And, invite your state boards of nursing or your state board accrediting board to come see what you're doing, advocating for healthcare simulation. I know we did that, and they were very impressed with the work that we were doing. So, think about the idea of putting yourself out there and putting your sim program and what you're doing out there, and also putting your students out there and allowing them to be the ones that are being a voice for you.
And if you are a part of a simulation alliance going forward together as that state simulation alliance or that region simulation alliance, think about that a lot of you together can come up with a lot of ideas. I encourage you to kind of have that as an agenda topic on a meeting to discuss different ways that people are currently advocating or ways that could be advocated in that area. I think it gives people a lot of ideas of how to move forward, but coming together, as one voice with many people there, is also very beneficial and will get more things done. That if you are, let's say, the Connecticut Simulation Alliance going forward to Connecticut legislation is going to mean more than just having that one person go solo. If you are that one person, still go, still do it, still, fight the fight. But I think as simulation alliances across the country, we also have a responsibility to have those conversations of how can we advocate at the state level, the county level, all of those different pieces, and gain the right contacts from that. And I will say that a lot of times you might meet someone and it might not be the right contact then, but having that person later on for the right opportunity, or they might remember you for the right opportunity, just the more networking like that. And I know I say networking, we both roll our eyes because there is nothing more that we would least like to do than go around and just network. It is not our vibe.
Well, it's just, when I say that, I love talking to simulationists all day, every day, but talking to people that I don't know about.
When it gets coined networking, it just all of a sudden feels like...
Yeah. Well, when you're trying to find the right person to talk to, it's hard.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, and it's also, if you're going to a legislation level, I think it always feels very intimidating. It kind of feels like you're in your sweatpants, everyone else is in business suits. You just feel like you don't fit, right? It's like, I don't belong here. But knowing that, going into that from a side of building relationships with your story, you might kind of have to kiss a lot of frogs, but you will find that person that to connect with. And even sometimes they're not the right person then, but they might be the right person later on.
Or they know the right person. They're just so much more connected. And I think I will say that you can also invite the legislators to your meetings to discuss some of the challenges. And I would encourage you to be prepared with some of those challenges. What's the ask? That's what they always want to know.
They will always ask you that. What is the ask?
Yeah. But But again, I think there's been huge support. If you look at a congressional spending year over year, there's typically a lot of funding that is given to maybe hospital systems or, to start a new medical school or something, but there's been a ton of investment into healthcare simulation in recent years. So they are hearing the value of healthcare simulation from somebody, but the more we can get the word out and the more we can share the benefits and have people aware of all of the work that we do in healthcare simulation, the better it's going to end up being in the long run for funding so that we can do more research or we can, service more students and things along those lines. So again, advocacy within healthcare simulation, in my opinion, there's lots of good work that's happening in pockets, but the more we can band together to be a single voice or a choir, I guess would be the right word, the better it's going to end up being in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, so to end out this episode, I want to ask you again, to kind of go forward with that imposter syndrome of being able to show that everyone makes mistakes, to quote Hannah Montana. What would you say is
Hannah Montana? What?
That's her song. Everybody makes mistakes.
Oh, everybody has those days.
I guess it's just a different generation here. That's fine. So my question would be, what is a time of you either going forward with advocacy or a presentation or something like that where you just feel like you missed it, just missed the ball, missed the opportunity?
Well, my funniest story is when I went to the legislature. So we won an award early on when we were starting. At the time, the name of the company was not Avkin, but we were starting Avkin. And we went to our congressman. So we were given basically carte blanche that we got to visit the congressman for the state of Delaware. Mm-hmm. And I went into Senator Coon's office, and I believe he's still a senator to this day, and he was very organized. He had 2 staffers there taking notes. He asked very pointed questions. He couldn't stay for the whole meeting, but he stayed for about the first 15 minutes. And I will say that with Senator Coons, I've gone to him with particular problems faced by us specifically, and some legislation was actually put forward. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that other small businesses have gone to him with the same problem, but it was just really cool to see that he heard me and that legislation went forward. But I then went to Senator Carper's office, and at Senator Carper's office, he didn't really understand what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And I was working very hard to explain what healthcare simulation was. And I was there with my chief operating officer, Amy. Her name is Amy also. But it was a very scattered meeting because I was trying to explain it. He wasn't necessarily understanding it. And then he said, well, I have to go, just like Senator Coons did. And he left us with an intern who was taking notes. And when I asked this intern what his normal role was, he said that his role was to write letters to constituents. And I thought, we're advocating for, startup companies and technology and, making healthcare simulation better and, all of these things. And I'm like, I've just gone over everybody's head, I think that happened in the Dr. Oz show too, when we did the Shark Tank version of Dr. Oz, and you get a minute and a half to explain it. And Damon John was the Shark Tank guy on there, and he's like, I literally don't have any idea what you do.
Yeah. I think that goes back to, though, sharing stories of personal experience in healthcare is really what's going to connect with people who don't do healthcare simulation.
Yeah.
And it's such a good place to start, because trying to understand it from a high level or this other app, they just don't understand it. They're not in healthcare. But being able to start with stories as to why it's important, I think that does show the humanity of it, where a lot of people can connect, because everyone's going to be consumers of healthcare at some point. So being able to have that, I think, is another huge piece there.
Yeah, and that I definitely think is important.
All right, everybody, thank you for joining us at Simulation Nation on advocating for healthcare simulation. We will see you next time.
Bye.